Hello, everyone. I must tell you, I do know that, on one level I was like, gee, Gloria, I'm so sorry you couldn't be here tonight. And the other thing was, gee, Gloria, I'm so glad I got to be here in your place tonight. This is quite wonderful. When they were talking to me about sharing craft, and I stopped and I thought, how do I want to get into this? And then I looked over, I was in my bedroom, which is also where I tend to do most of my writing. I love laptops. You can kind of take them any place. But my bedroom is like very important because on one wall to the left of my bed, there's a photograph. There are lots of family photographs, but there's one very large one. And that large one is of my great-grandmother. She was a woman who was born sometime in probably the late 1840s, 1850s. The records are lost, I'll never know. She was born a slave in the state of Virginia. She had the first 2 of her 17 children while she was still a slave. My grandmother, her youngest child, was her 17th and last. My mother was my grandmother's last child, and I was my mother's last child. And I always look at this photograph. I actually have 2 of my great-grandmother, Lavinia Risen. When I was a little girl, I remember they were over my grandmother's bed. And I would look at these photographs of this. You've seen photographs of people from the 1900s. They tend to have a very solemn, people are not laughing or whatever. They're taking a photograph was a serious business. And trying to figure out who she was, but not having, I want to quote, the questions, to even ask at that time. I do know this, that she, like so many of the women of her age, struggled to learn to read, if they did, and I don't know if she did. That writing was something that was still hard to come by. That every time I begin writing something or working on someone else's writing, I always look to her. I look to her and I realize every time that the things we take for granted, the fact that we as girls and women can speak our truths, can write, can have things published, can write poetry and books and get uppity and in people's spaces, can tell our stories and sing our songs loud, is still a privilege that still so many other girls and women in so many parts of this world don't have. They keep our words from us. They've kept our words from us. And so when, I, who am a lover of history, know that, you go back in time and you want to read about what was life like, most of it is still written by men, telling us about the experience. Not our words, not our stories, not our songs. What we get to do, which my great-grandmother didn't get to do, which most of your great-grandmothers don't get to do, which millions of girls and women still in this world don't get to do, is we get to write our own histories. We get to sing our songs, and we get to bring our truths to power. Words change worlds. I'm ever mindful of that when I write. It kicks my butt sometimes. You said it when we were talking earlier. The revisions, are all about the words. How to make it stronger, how to make it better, how to make it clearer. Now, the worst thing about being a me and a writer is that I started out as a me who was an editor, and before that, a me who was a reader. And then, so that I struggle a lot with when do you stop revising, girlfriend? Do you know what I mean? There comes a point where you have got to let it go. And know that it can go out into the universe and you may read it 10 years later and go, oh, damn. How did that's not really what it should have said. Here's what I've also learned, to forgive myself. Who is perfect? What does perfect look like? I don't know. Writing is always in progress. We are always in progress as writers. One of the things I've also learned is that as women, even when we're writing, as girls, when we're writing, there are moments when we start to box ourselves in, where we make a decision that says, oh, we can do this kind of writing, but not that kind of writing. Do you know what I'm talking about? Any of you? This kind of writing, like everybody's very comfortable with the idea that as women, we can write about our personal experiences. You know, what people are still not comfortable with is when we want to talk about, I want to call it foreign policy, the affairs of state, when we want to write about the world the way we think it should be. There are still a lot of people who will say to us, oh, that's not what the kind of writing you're supposed to do. What we, as girls and women, have to say is that there are no boundaries. There are no boundaries. I'm struggling with a memoir, and part of my struggle with this memoir has been that I was putting boundaries on myself. I'm writing a memoir about the 70s and about me in the 70s, back in the day. I love that expression. Oh boy, back in the day when I was a bad girl. You know? You know, which is what, and of course, you know, part of the thing is, you know, when you're writing about yourself in the past, you know, you have to really struggle sometimes that you don't clean your stuff up. You know, where you're willing to say, I was a bad girl, and own it, you know, so that's been part of the struggle. The other part of the struggle is because it's not just about me personally. I am also trying to write a social history about what it was like and what happened to Black people in America during this period, and what happened to Black women, and what happened to women during this period. And so I kind of, you know, I made a real tall order for myself. It's called Let's Not Ever Try to Do Things Halfway, right? But, you know, at some point what happened, like I want to call it in the first 2 rounds of this book, was that I got so caught into the social history that I started to disappear, as in, it's almost easier to write about stuff at the distance, in some ways. And I had to reel me back in and bring me forward again in this memoir, or else it was called Then Write a Damn Social History, Marcia. You can't, you know, don't go both ways. And what's really helpful, and I don't know if it's true for the rest of you, but what's really helpful is to have, I call it a couple of, you know, friends. You know, the girlfriend who will tell you what you don't want to hear. Do you know what I mean? The friend, male friend, whoever's, who will tell you what you don't want to hear. So, you know, I thought, last year, I thought, Marcia, you finally got this. It's really working. Let me show it to my bestest friends. You know, so I sent it off to my 2 bestest girlfriends, you know, my womb to tomb, you know, those kind. And the silence was deafening. I mean, you know, until finally, and I knew what was up when they both called me to say, and you know how you know when your girlfriends will talk to each other? Okay, we'll call her, we're gonna take her out for martinis. Girlfriend, come on, let's go and have supper. So we went out and had supper, and so we were whatever, and after I'd had my first martini, they was like, have another one. I knew I was in trouble. And what, you know, what I had to hear them say is, I don't hear your voice here. Your voice isn't here. It's like, what happened to you? It's like there's some interesting information, but your voice is not here. You know, girlfriend, you need to take a breath, step back, think about it. Now, I don't know if you've had this happen, but sometimes what we have to do with work is that we almost have to walk away from it for a minute or 2 to let it percolate, to see if we can figure out what's going on. And for me, I started to get really frightened because I thought to myself, will you ever get it right? Maybe this isn't the book you're supposed to write. Maybe, you know, you've made a mistake, because they were right, my voice wasn't there. Well, long time ago, someone said to me, sometimes you have to leave it to the universe. You have to walk away from something, you just don't fret, just let it be, and then see if it comes back to you. You know, you throw. Unfortunately, it started to come back again. But the other thing that I realized is when you do have those moments when the screen goes blank or where your words don't feel like, is that the business of writing is that we still keep writing. Writing something, writing anything, whether it's, the ABCs, so that we can, that we keep at it. Because our writing only works when we are writing. Now, I was saying to my sister MCs, before they went up on stage, not too long, how's my time? Oh, okay. That, about a month and a half ago, I was at a writer's salon, and the great Toni Morrison was there, and someone asked her a question. She was the speaker, and they asked her, so, when are you writing? And she answered by saying, when am I not writing? She said, I'm writing when I'm washing dishes, I'm thinking about plot, or one of my characters is dancing up. But the other thing that she said that I think is so, really important, which was she articulated something that I know as a writer and as an editor I've striven for. And she said that one of the things that always motivated her and continues to motivate her as a writer is that she wanted to write absent the gaze. Now, we often, as women, talk about the gaze, and we mean the male gaze. And that's part of it, writing for the approval of men that we had struggled away from. But what she was specifically talking about in this point was also writing as a Black writer who's female, absent the gaze. Absent the gaze of what whites or others think about our experience as Black people, or as African American women in particular, so that we don't write, I want to call it, to the gallery. We write for ourselves. We have to write our truths, absent the gaze. That's not easy. Each of us, coming from wherever we come from, do you know what I mean? Different cultures, different classes, different life experiences, have to constantly struggle not to be intimidated by the gaze. To think that, yes, we want to write, we want people to read what we write, but we can't write to please them. We have to write to be truthful to ourselves and to be truthful to our experiences. So, I know I'm supposed to get off the stage now, so I'm going to do, I got it together. Going to do it quickly. And I think I have a segue here that will work. Many years ago, when I was, again, a very young editor and thought I knew a whole lot that I didn't, I had the great distinct pleasure of going to Mississippi and spending time with one of the great civil rights activists who was still too little known. Her name was Fannie Lou Hamer. And she was one of the great champions of the civil rights movement in the Deep South, where racism was so deeply entrenched. Mrs. Hamer was an activist all of her life. In addition to being an activist within the state of Mississippi, she was also an activist who helped to transform the National Democratic Party, the party that takes such pride in bringing the rainbow and electing, Barack Obama. But, in the 60s, when she came to Chicago to challenge that party, it was a party where people of color could still struggle to become delegates because the deck was stacked against us. And she protested that. And I remember asking her, because I was interviewing her for an article for Essence magazine at the time, what kept her going, what kept her motivated. And she told me the story. And so everywhere I go, I tell Fannie Lou Hamer's story. And the story was, there was an old woman who was blind and very wise. And people from miles around would come for advice. And because her advice was always good, her reputation grew. One day, two people decided they wanted to play a trick on this old blind sage. And so they came to her house, and she was on the porch. And they came, and as they came, one of them said to the other, look, there's a bird. We're going to catch that bird, and we're going to carry that bird in our hands and hold the beak tight. And we're going to ask that old blind woman a question. We're going to ask her, is this thing in our hands living, or is it dead? And if she says it's dead, we'll let the bird fly free. But if she says it's alive, we'll smother it. An ugly trick question. So they came to her. with a bird, one of them holding the bird, heart beating in their hands. And they asked her the question. And the old woman sat and rocked a while, and finally she looked up and said, I don't know. All I know is it's in your hands. Well, moral of the story for Fannie Lou Hamer, the moral of the story for us, the moral of us, for especially writing women, we have birds in our hands. We have birds of truth. We have the birds of our voice and our realities. We have the power in our hands when we write, and in our brains and in our hearts. And every time we put those words to paper, every time we let them loose in poetry, every time we say, I have an idea, I have an opinion, I have a thought, birds fly. So keep the birds flying, girlfriends. Now, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce tonight's first reader, Gina DeFrisco.